Hi guys, and welcome to the tutorial for the Camila dress pattern. We're going to take this step by step. This pattern is available in my Etsy shop for purchase and download. It comes in sizes extra small through 3XL and also in the full length and the mini version. This pattern is going to follow along with the written instructions, and we're going to start out with our pieces already printed and our fabric cut out. So refer to the written instructions and the actual pattern pieces for cutting instructions. Once you've got all your fabric pieces cut out, meet me here and let's start sewing together. So I've cut out all of my pieces and I have marked all of my darts. I am starting with the front dress piece. I'm starting with my lining. You can see it's facing up and I have my darts marked. You can also start with your main fabric if you wish. We're going to repeat the exact same steps for both of these, but my right side of my lining is facing up. I'm going to pin my darts that are my bust darts on the side right there with right sides facing, and I'm going to repeat this for both sides. So I'm just going to pin up my darts and then I'm going to take those over to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew them down into place. And again, make sure you're folding your darts in with right sides facing for both of these. When you're ready to sew these down, make sure you start with a little back stitch at the end of that dart just to make sure it stays in place. Once you've got your darts nice and sewn, we are just going to give this a little press. If you have a tailoring ham, use that because this is on a curve, or just find a sweater, a t-shirt, something that gives you a little bit of a curve to press this down. And I like to press it down towards the bottom of the dress. Now we're going to move on to our back dress pieces. I'm going to grab one of these, and again, this is right sides facing up. I have my dart marked right there. I'm going to do the exact same thing we did on the front in that I'm going to fold in my dart with right sides facing. I'm going to pin that into place, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to sew that down. And I'm going to repeat this for both of my back pieces. Now that I've got both of those pins, I'm going to do the same thing I did with my other one and make sure I start that dart with a back stitch. Then we're going to give these a quick press. I like to press my darts towards the center back, and I'm going to do that for both of my back skirt pieces. Now that all of our darts are sewn on our front and our back pieces, we are going to start connecting them. I have my front dress piece with the right sides facing up, and I'm going to grab one of my back dress pieces, and this starts right at where your bust dart starts. So we're going to lay these on top of each other, right sides facing. Make sure the top of your back dress piece starts at the bust dart for your front dress piece. And we're going to pin this all the way from the top to the bottom, and then we're going to sew that down into place. Once that's done, we are just going to repeat the exact same steps for your other back piece. Again, that's going to start right at your bust dart, and we're going to pin from the top to the bottom. We'll sew that side down just like we did the other side, and then it is time to press those seams flat, and we will do that for both of your seams. After this, you should have what kind of resembles a dress with the back open. We're now going to repeat those exact same steps for our main fabric, or if you started with your main fabric, now repeat it for your lining, but the exact same steps. We're going to sew down all of our darts at the bust and in the back, and then connect our back pieces with our front, making sure we press all of our seams along the way. Once you've repeated all of those steps once again, we're going to set both our main fabric and our lining fabric dress pieces aside, and we are going to grab our straps. Now, my straps don't have a front or a back, but if you have a front and a back, or a right side and a wrong side, you're going to fold your straps long ways with right sides facing, just like how I'm kind of doing right here. That is the long ways. Now you can do this a couple different ways. I like to take a thread and attach it to the end and then pull that string through, and I'll show you how I do that. But really the end goal is to have these straps be pulled right sides out. You can do this either with a loop turner, or you can do this by taking a safety pin and pinning it to the end and pushing it in through itself. It is up to you. I prefer this string method, so you can see I've had a string that's on the end of my fabric right there, and then I sew these together right sides facing, taking my thread and pushing it on the inside so it kind of gets encased in the strap. And then once I've sewn all this up, I pull it through so that it becomes right sides facing. You guys don't have to use this technique. I just find it to be the easiest, but whatever technique you use, just make sure you're getting a really nice thin strap. And once you've sewn both of your straps with right sides facing, we are just going to trim off that seam allowance. This is also going to help your straps get really, really thin, and it makes it easier to push it right sides out. Again, I'm doing this with my thread, so I'm just going to pull my thread and push this in on itself until I have all of those seam allowances on the inside of my strap. You'll repeat this for both of your straps, so all of the seam allowance will be on the inside, and then once you've done this for both of your straps, we're going to connect it to your lining dress. So go ahead and lay out your lining dress. This is the right side of my lining dress, and you can see I have little notches right there that are also marked on your pattern. And again, this is the right side of my lining, and I'm just going to connect the end of my strap with this. And the strap is going to be going towards the bottom of the dress. Once I've pinned both of these into place, I'm going to sew them down, and it should look just like this once you've done that. Once these are connected, we are going to connect our lining and our main fabric. So I did change the orientation of this so you guys can see everything. The top where my hand just was is the neck piece. So this is my main fabric dress laid out with right sides facing up. And I'm going to grab my lining piece and I'm going to place these right sides facing up against each other. Make sure your straps are sandwiched in between those two and that they're going down. You don't want to accidentally sew a part of your strap into your lining when you're doing this, only that top edge. So make sure the long part of it stays sandwiched in between your main fabric and your lining. Now we're going to start pinning this into place. Make sure you align all of those darts and the seams and then also the bust dart so that the lining and the main fabric are at the same point for each of those seams. But we're also just pinning and sewing the side to back pieces. We are leaving out the neck. So do not sew up your neck piece. You will leave that out. We are only pinning and sewing each of these sides and the back. Once you've got that all pinned into place, we will take this over to our sewing machine and sew it down. And again, we're making sure we are not sewing the neck. We are just doing the sides and the back pieces. Once we've sewn this, we want to make sure that our lining doesn't peel out while we're wearing this. So I'm going to perform an understitch. So I'm going to take my seam allowance and I'm going to sew it towards my lining. And I'm going to show you this with my sewing machine as well. So you're just going to separate your main fabric and your lining, and we are just sewing the seam allowance to the lining. This is just going to help so that your fabric doesn't peel out, your lining doesn't peel out and is hidden behind your main fabric while you're wearing it. And you can see this does take a little bit of finessing because it's a long dress and you're separating your lining and your main fabric, but do this all along those sides that we just sewed. You can also perform a top stitch instead of an understitch if you wish, but an understitch will be invisible for the dress if you prefer that. And last note, while you are performing this understitch, make sure your straps are not accidentally getting sewn into this while you're doing this. Make sure those straps are off to the sides. Now you can flip your dress inside out and it should look something like this. Now we're going to get started on your collar piece. You can see I've got my lining and my main fabric, and where my hands just were, those are the notches that you are not going to sew. So those two notches on my lining piece are not getting sewn, so I'm not going to pin those. I'm going to pin the sides, the bottom to the notch, and then all along the top of the collar. So we're leaving that bottom part open because it's going to be connected to our neck piece. So it is not getting sewn down. Once you have everything pinned into place, it should look like this with that bottom part still open. We're going to sew this down and then we're just going to trim off our seam allowance. I like to clip those edges to make them a little bit sharper. We're going to trim off all of the seam allowance that we've sewn. Make sure you don't trim that neck piece that isn't sewn yet. We are not trimming that at all. Once you've done this, you're going to flip your collar right sides out and we are going to give it a nice press. And take a note from me because I did end up having to replace my collar. Make sure your iron isn't turned up too much. You can see I kind of burned my edge, so make sure your iron is not too hot. Don't make the same mistake I did. I'm also going to press the seam allowance up inside the collar, like you can see I'm doing here. This will make our next step of attaching it to the actual dress piece a little bit easier. If you just lightly press the seam allowance up, it gives you a little bit better of a guide, and you'll do this for both the main fabric and the lining fabric, and follow along with the same seam allowance that's already been sewn. Now we're just going to give our collar a top stitch. We're only going to top stitch where the collar has been sewn. So again, don't sew down that middle part. The middle bottom part will get its top stitch once we've added it to the actual dress. Now we're going to add our collar to our dress. So we're going to grab our dress. I'm going to place this right sides facing up, and I'm going to flip my collar so that it's right sides facing with my dress, and I'm going to pin just the main fabric of my collar to both the main fabric and my lining fabric of the dress. So it's getting pinned to the entirety of the dress, that neck piece, but only the main fabric. You'll see what we do with the lining once we finish sewing down this main fabric part of the collar. Once I've got that all pinned down, I'm going to sew it into place, and it should look like this when you're done. Now we're going to hide that seam allowance with our lining piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm taking my lining and I'm folding it up, following the same seam allowance that we've already sewn, and I'm folding it up so that the seam allowance of the neck piece is hidden inside the collar. So you can kind of see what I'm doing in a second. And this does take a little bit of finessing. So make sure if you have to use a lot of pins, you can iron your fabric again, but we're hiding that seam allowance by folding over our lining. And this is where we're going to finish off that top stitch of our collar. It is going to go all along what was once that open bottom neck piece. Once you've done that and you've sewn it into place, give everything a nice press, and you should have your collar connected with all of that seam allowance hidden. Now we're going to work on the zipper first. So I like to do the zipper before we finish up the rest of the bottom, because I think you should try your dress on first and see how you like the neck and the straps to feel. So starting with our zipper, I'm going to grab just my main fabric. I'm going to take my zipper and I'm going to flip it so that the teeth are facing away from the center back, and I'm going to pin this all the way from the top to the bottom just to my main fabric. You're not pinning your lining just yet, we'll add that later. We're just pinning our zipper to our main fabric with the teeth facing away from the center back. And once you finish one side, go ahead and repeat for the opposite side the exact same way. So take your zipper and flip the teeth away from the center back and pin it just to your main fabric. Now I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine and sew. Make sure you switch to a zipper foot, and we're going to sew our zipper down to our main fabric. Before you move on to this next step, make sure you zip your zipper up and make sure it's looking okay before you move on to adding your lining. To add our lining, we're going to take it up and over. So I'm going to pull it out and I'm going to take it right sides facing to the right side of my main fabric, still with the zipper sandwiched in between and the teeth facing away from the center back. So we're kind of taking it up and over to meet our main fabric. And then I'm going to pin this into place till I reach the spot where I stopped sewing for my main fabric. Once you've done one side, repeat for the second side. Again, we're pulling our lining up and out and over so that it meets our main fabric with right sides facing, and the teeth of our zipper is sandwiched in between, facing away from the center back. I always call this kind of like a fortune cookie looking thing, a very weird fortune cookie looking thing. But once we flip it right side out, you'll see you have a perfectly concealed zipper in between your lining and your main fabric. So once you've got this done, take this over to your sewing machine and sew it down into place. Once you've done that, you can flip it right sides out and make sure you zip up your zipper once more before we move on to the next step. Now we're just gonna work on closing up the bottom of our dress. We're gonna do these separately. So we're gonna do our lining and our main fabric. I'm gonna start with my main fabric and I'm gonna flip this so that it's inside out and my lining is pulled out of the way. And I'm gonna take my main fabric and I'm gonna put it right sides facing. When I do this, I'm also gonna pin right underneath where that zipper ends, because you wanna start sewing right where that zipper ends to make sure you don't get a little tiny hole in between the bottom of your dress and that zipper ending. And we're gonna pin all the way down from the bottom of that zipper to the bottom of our dress. So the remainder of our dress, we're just gonna close up again with right sides facing. Once you've got this all pinned, take it over to your sewing machine and sew everything down into place. Once you've done your main fabric, we are going to flip this over. So now we do our lining the exact same way. Make sure you get right up under where that zipper stops and you pin and sew from there. And we're gonna pin all the way from the bottom of that zipper to the bottom of our dress and sew down into place. Once you've sewn both of these, we are just going to give that seam a nice press. We're gonna press it flat, both for our lining and our main fabric. Once you've sewn up that bottom back piece, you are actually almost done. I specifically leave the button and the straps at the very end because I want you guys to try them on. So we're gonna take our straps and we're gonna put those at the bottom of its correct side, so the same side that it's on, collar piece. We're also gonna do our button as well. And I'm gonna do my button first and then I'm gonna attach my straps. But again, I like to save this for the very, very end so you know exactly how tight you want your collar and how tight you want your straps. I'm gonna start with my button and I'm just taking this over to my machine and using a buttonhole stitch and a buttonhole foot, I'm going to create my buttonhole and then sew on my button, which I normally like to do by hand. If you guys need help using a button foot, I do have a video about this. Most every sewing machine will come with a buttonhole foot and a buttonhole stitch. Once I've done my buttonhole stitch, I'm going to attach those straps again to the bottom of the same side of the collar. Make sure you do a lot of back stitches with this because you want to make sure those straps are secure. And then again, I prefer to add my buttons by hand, so I'm gonna sew on my button and then I'm gonna button this and make sure everything is looking correct before I move on. Also, you can try this on and make sure everything is fitting correct. Once your collar is done, it brings us to the very last step. We are just going to finish off the bottom with a rolled hem. So fold your fabric in once and then fold it in once more and sew it down into place. You'll do this for both your main fabric and your lining. And once you have that rolled hem ready, you're just going to give it a nice press again for your main fabric and your lining so it looks super crisp. And that is your very last step. I hope this video tutorial was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you love your brand new custom made dress. Make sure you guys follow and subscribe as I'm going to be releasing new patterns monthly.